Every time China decided to build something, they looked at the most impossible location imaginable and said, "Perfect. You're about to witness construction projects that had no business existing, hotels carved into the Earth's wounds, temples balanced on vertical cliffs, bridges spanning chasms that swallowed clouds. These aren't just buildings in difficult places. These are declarations of war against geography itself. And we're starting with the most insane one of all, InterContinental Shanghai Wonderland. You're standing at the edge of an abandoned quarry pit, staring down into an 88-meter gash in the earth where explosives once ripped stone from bedrock. For decades, this wound just sat there, flooded, unstable, completely worthless. Then someone looked at this vertical walled crater and decided to build a 5-star luxury hotel inside it. Not beside it, inside it. The engineering problem was brutal. How do you anchor a structure to walls that were blasted apart, not naturally formed? Every surface was fractured rock, weakened by years of explosives. They couldn't build up. The whole point was going down. So they carved into the quarry walls themselves, anchoring the hotel directly into the stone that had been deemed too damaged to use. 16 floors, 2 of them completely underwater beneath the flooded quarry lake. You can sleep in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows staring into an artificial lake, fish swimming past while you're 88 meters below ground level. But that underwater hotel was just the beginning of building where buildings had no right to exist. Potala Palace. You're looking at a 13-story fortress sitting on a mountain peak at 12,000 feet above sea level. This isn't modern construction with cranes and helicopters. This is 1645. The Qing dynasty decided to build a massive stone palace where oxygen is 30% thinner than sea level, where every breath is a struggle, where your body starts shutting down from altitude sickness. And they didn't just build a small monastery. They built over 1,000 rooms sprawling across 360,000 square feet. Here's the problem. At that altitude, workers can barely function. You're hauling stones up a mountain where each step feels like running a marathon. No machinery. Just human beings dragging massive blocks of stone up switchback paths while their bodies are screaming for oxygen that isn't there. And the foundation? They built directly into the mountainside, carving chambers into living rock, making the palace inseparable from the peak itself. The walls are 13 feet thick, in places not for defense, but because they needed that mass to anchor the structure against winds that hit the summit at highway speeds. Stone by stone, floor by floor, they built upward in an environment where construction workers were operating at the edge of human endurance. The result is a building that doesn't sit on the mountain. It is the mountain. But at least they built on solid ground. The next location threw that luxury out the window. Hanging Temple, Zhuangkong Sea. You're staring at a 1,500-year-old wooden temple jutting out from a vertical cliff face, 75 meters above the ground, held up by what looks like toothpicks. This is the Hanging Temple, and it's been defying gravity since 500 AD. The entire structure, halls, walkways, 40 rooms, is suspended on wooden beams that were driven directly into holes drilled into the cliff, not bolted, not anchored with steel. Just wooden crossbeams wedged into rock, supporting the full weight of a multi-story temple complex. Here's what makes this impossible. You can't build scaffolding on a sheer cliff. You can't work from the ground up because there is no ground, just a 75-meter drop onto rocks. So 6th century builders had to dangle from ropes, drill holes into the cliff face by hand, and insert support beams while hanging in midair. Then they built the temple outward from those beams, adding floor after floor to a structure that had nothing beneath it but empty space. The beams aren't even the real support. They're partially decorative. The actual load-bearing structure is a network of supports hidden inside the cliff itself, a skeleton of wood driven deep into the rock. But even knowing that doesn't make it less terrifying when you walk through hallways that cantilever into thin air. It's been standing for 15 centuries, through earthquakes, through floods in the valley below, through everything. And somehow, that's still not the most hostile environment China decided to build in. Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge. You're looking at 34 miles of bridge and tunnel crossing open ocean, connecting 3 cities that were separated by one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. The Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge isn't just long, it's navigating an impossible equation. You need a bridge high enough for massive cargo ships to pass underneath. But you're also building next to one of Asia's busiest airports, which means you can't have bridge towers tall enough to interfere with flight paths. And you're doing all of this in the Pearl River Delta, where typhoons rip through with winds strong enough to shred conventional structures. So they did something radical. They stopped building a bridge halfway across and started building a tunnel instead. 4 miles of the crossing drops completely underwater, a submerged tunnel sitting on the ocean floor in sections that each weigh 75,000 tons. They built these sections on land, floated them out to sea, then sank them into a trench dredged into the seabed. Each section had to connect with millimeter precision while underwater, creating a watertight seal that could handle the pressure of an entire ocean pressing down. And the transition points? They built artificial islands in the middle of the ocean just to give the bridge somewhere to dive underground. You drive across a bridge, descend into an underwater tunnel, then emerge on an artificial island that didn't exist 5 years ago. But that ocean crossing was just infrastructure. The next location made the ocean itself the foundation. Shimao Shenzhen Hong Kong Deep Bay Center. You're staring at a skyscraper that's 2,297 feet tall, built on land that doesn't exist. The Shimao Deep Bay Center sits on reclaimed coastal wetland, ground so unstable that it's basically underwater mud with delusions of being solid earth. You can't just pour a foundation into wetlands. The weight of a 70-story tower would sink straight through soft sediment like a knife through water. So they had to create bedrock where none existed. Engineers drove over 200 foundation piles down through the wetland sediment, some reaching depths of over 300 feet, until they hit actual solid rock beneath the coastal mush. Each pile is a massive concrete column that punches through unstable ground to anchor into bedrock far below. Then they tied all those piles together with a reinforced concrete mat foundation so thick it could support the entire weight of the tower. They essentially built an artificial stone platform on stilts driven into the Earth's crust, then constructed a super tall skyscraper on top of it. The tower weighs hundreds of thousands of tons, all of it resting on columns drilled through what used to be swamp. You're working in office spaces 700 feet up, standing on ground that was underwater a decade ago. But that was fighting soft earth. The next project took on geology that was actively trying to kill them. Huajiang Grand Canyon Bridge. You're looking at a bridge spanning a canyon so deep that clouds settle into it like fog in a bowl. 2,050 feet straight down to the river below. The Huajiang Grand Canyon Bridge doesn't cross a gap. It crosses a void. The canyon walls are nearly vertical, separated by over 4,000 feet of empty air, with nothing but sheer rock faces on either side. You can't build support columns in a chasm this deep. There's literally nothing to build on except air. So they went full suspension bridge. But with a problem most suspension bridges don't face. How do you string cables across a gap when there's no way to get from one side to the other? You can't drive across. You can't walk across. There's a 2,000-foot drop between you and the other rim. They used a rocket. Engineers fired a rocket trailing a thin pilot line across the entire width of the canyon. Once that first line was across, they used it to pull progressively thicker cables until they had the main suspension cables in place, each one thick enough to hold the roadway that would eventually hang from them. The whole bridge deck is suspended on steel, hanging over a drop so deep that if you fell, you'd have time to regret every decision you've ever made before hitting bottom. Now trucks drive across a canyon that swallows clouds, suspended on cables strung by literal rocket fire. But at least that canyon was empty. The next impossible location came with a rather specific obstacle in the way. Mount Fanjing Temple. You're staring at two Buddhist temples sitting on top of a rock pillar that looks like a stone middle finger jutting into the sky. Mount Fanjing's Red Cloud's golden summit is a needle of rock that splits into two separate peaks at the top, separated by a narrow gorge. The entire formation is barely wide enough for a single building, let alone two temples. And it's not gently sloped, it's a vertical stone spire rising over 100 feet, with sides so steep that there's physically no room to build a foundation. So they didn't build a foundation. They built directly into the rock itself. Stone masons in the Ming Dynasty carved platforms out of the living rock, chiseling away the mountain peak to create flat surfaces where none existed. Then they constructed the temples on those carved ledges, anchoring wooden structures to stone that had been hand-carved with tools that would be considered primitive even by medieval standards. One temple on each peak, connected by a stone bridge spanning the narrow chasm between them. You reach the top after climbing stone steps carved directly into the pillar, and you're standing in a temple that's gripping the summit like a barnacle on a ship's hull. There's no flat ground, no valley to shelter in, just a building balanced on a geological accident. The monks wanted to be closer to heaven, so they built on the nearest thing to a stairway there. But those monks had centuries to work. The next project had to move 3,000 tons in under a minute. Three Gorges ship lift. You're watching a 3,000-ton cargo ship get picked up and carried over a dam like it's a toy in a bathtub. The Three Gorges ship lift is an elevator for vessels, a massive steel chamber that fills with water, cradles an entire cargo ship, then lifts the whole thing 370 feet straight up to clear the dam. But here's the problem. Ships aren't designed to be lifted. They're designed to float. You can't just hook a crane to a hull and yank it skyward. So, they built a water elevator. The ship floats into a chamber the size of a soccer field. Gates seal behind it, trapping the vessel in what's essentially a giant swimming pool with walls. Then the entire chamber, water, ship, and all gets hoisted vertically by a rack and pinion system strong enough to lift the weight of a skyscraper. The ship never leaves the water. It just rises, suspended in a block of river, climbing higher than a 30-story building. The precision required is absurd. The lift has to move millions of gallons of water and a 3,000-ton ship in perfect sync, raising it 370 feet without spilling or creating waves that could smash the vessel against the chamber walls. The entire journey takes about 40 minutes. You sail into an elevator, and you sail out the other side of a mountain, but that was moving ships vertically. The next location made gravity itself negotiable. Hongyadong. You're looking at an 11-story building where every single floor has a ground-level exit. Hongyadong sits on a mountainside so steep that what's the first floor on one side is the 11th floor on the other. This isn't a clever architectural trick, it's a building that follows the contour of a cliff face in a way that breaks your brain. You can walk out of the bottom floor onto a street, take an elevator up 11 stories, and walk out onto a completely different street that's also at ground level. The structure clings to the slope like a staircase made of buildings, each level terraced into the mountainside at a different elevation. But here's the engineering nightmare. You're not building on flat bedrock. You're anchoring a massive structure to a slope that's trying to pull everything downward. Every floor needs its own foundation carved into the hillside at a different depth, creating a stepped pyramid of supports driven into unstable terrain. And they didn't build this recently with modern materials. The original structure dates back centuries, when builders had to carve foundations into living rock using hand tools and prayer. Each level is essentially its own separate building, stacked and connected vertically, with the weight distributed across multiple anchor points driven into the cliff at different heights. You're standing in a building that has 11 first floors and somehow doesn't collapse. But that building at least had solid rock to grip. The next location had nothing but air beneath it. Tianmen Mountain, Glass Skywalk. You're standing on a transparent walkway jutting out from a cliff face, staring down through glass at a 4,600-foot drop to the valley floor. The Tianmen Mountain Glass Skywalk is a horseshoe-shaped platform cantilevered off a vertical rock face, suspended over nothing. And it's not just a small viewing platform, it wraps around the cliff for 200 feet, all of it held up by steel beams anchored into the mountain. But here's the problem. You're not anchoring into stable bedrock. You're drilling into a cliff face that's been weathered by wind and rain for millions of years, where the rock could be fractured or weak in ways you can't predict. So they over-engineered it to an insane degree. Each support beam is drilled dozens of feet into the mountain, held in place by anchors that could support loads far beyond what the walkway would ever experience. The glass itself is multi-layered laminated panels, each one capable of holding the weight of a car. They tested it by driving a Land Rover across it, just to prove the point. You walk out onto transparent floor panels, and your brain screams that you're about to fall, even though you're standing on glass strong enough to park a truck on. Every step feels like stepping into empty air, with nothing between you and the valley except a few inches of engineered crystal. But that skywalk was built for tourists. The next impossible location was carved by villagers who had no choice. Guoliang Tunnel Road. You're looking at a tunnel carved through the side of a mountain by 13 villagers using hammers and chisels. The village of Guoliang sat trapped on top of a cliff, accessible only by a treacherous footpath carved into vertical rock, a route so dangerous that multiple villagers died every year trying to navigate it. No roads in, no roads out, just isolation and a slowly dying community. So, in 1972, 13 villagers decided to fix it themselves. They started hammering. For 5 years, these 13 men hand-carved a 3/4-mile tunnel through solid rock, working with the most basic tools imaginable. No industrial equipment, no explosives. Just men with hammers, chisels, and an absolute refusal to stay trapped. They'd chip away at the mountain face during the day, then haul out the rubble by hand. The tunnel isn't smooth or uniform. You can see the chisel marks on the walls where they hacked through stone inch by inch. And they didn't just bore straight through. They carved windows into the cliff face at intervals, openings that let light into the tunnel and gave drivers terrifying views of the 1,000-foot drop outside. The whole passage is barely wide enough for a single car, with rough-hewn walls that still bear the scars of 5 years of relentless manual labor. 13 men turned an impassable mountain into a drivable road using nothing but spite and hammers. But that tunnel at least stayed on land. The next location had to create land from nothing. Dalian Jinzhou Bay Airport. You're looking at an airport built on ocean that was turned into land specifically so planes could land on it. Dalian Jinzhou Bay Airport sits on over 8 square miles of reclaimed seabed ground that was underwater until construction crews dumped enough rock and soil into the ocean to create an artificial island. But here's the nightmare. Airport runways can't settle. Even an inch of ground shift will crack concrete and make a runway unusable. And reclaimed land settles constantly as the fill material compacts under its own weight. So they're building a massive airport on ground that's actively trying to sink. Engineers had to compact the fill material to densities that would normally take decades to achieve naturally, using dynamic compaction, literally dropping massive weights from cranes to pound the reclaimed land into submission. Then, they had to wait, monitoring every millimeter of settlement, adjusting and recompacting, as the artificial island compressed under its own mass. And they couldn't just reclaim a flat area, they needed specific gradients for drainage, precise elevations for runway approach angles, and stable enough ground to support terminal buildings and taxiways. All of it on land that didn't exist 5 years before the first plane landed. You're taking off from a runway sitting on what used to be ocean floor, trusting that millions of tons of compacted fill won't shift beneath you. But at least airports stay in one place. The next project had to survive an environment that actively tries to destroy everything in it. Rudong Offshore Wind Power Base. You're looking at hundreds of wind turbines standing in ocean waters that get hammered by typhoons every single year. The Rudong Offshore Wind Power Base sits off China's eastern coast in the Yellow Sea, where Category 4 typhoons roll through with winds exceeding 130 miles per hour. Winds strong enough to shred conventional structures. And these aren't small turbines. Each one stands over 500 feet tall, with blades longer than a football field, sitting on foundations driven into the seabed in waters up to 100 feet deep. Here's the problem. You're building machines designed to catch wind in a place where wind regularly becomes a destructive force. The turbines have to survive the exact conditions they're meant to harness. So each foundation is a monopile, a single massive steel tube driven over 200 feet into the ocean floor, engineered to flex with wave action and typhoon force winds without snapping. The turbines themselves have automatic shutdown systems that detect dangerous wind speeds and lock the blades in position, transforming them from power generators into survival mode structures that simply endure until the storm passes. And the installation? Each turbine had to be assembled offshore by specialized vessels in a marine environment where weather windows are narrow and sea conditions can turn deadly in hours. Crews worked in the same waters that would later try to destroy what they built. You're harvesting energy from an ocean that actively wants to kill the equipment doing it. But those turbines at least operated above ground. The final project disappeared entirely beneath a city. Jinan Huanggang. You're driving through a highway that doesn't exist above ground because it's buried completely beneath a living, breathing city. The Jinan Huanggang Underground Expressway runs for over 2 miles, directly underneath active neighborhoods, office buildings, and infrastructure that can't be disturbed. This isn't a tunnel through a mountain or under a river. This is a multi-lane highway carved beneath a city that was already built, where millions of people live and work directly above the construction zone. Here's the nightmare. You can't dig a massive trench through a city without causing the buildings above to collapse. Roads would cave in, foundations would fail, entire neighborhoods would sink into the excavation. So they used tunnel boring machines, mechanical worms that chew through earth and bedrock while simultaneously installing support walls, creating the tunnel as they advance without ever opening the ground to the surface. But boring beneath a city means navigating a maze of existing infrastructure, subway lines, water mains, electrical conduits, sewage systems, all of which are holding up the city above. One mistake, one breach into existing tunnels or utilities, and you've got catastrophic failure. The boring machines had to thread between underground obstacles with millimeter precision, carving roadway through earth that was already supporting massive loads. Now traffic flows beneath the city in tunnels that people walking above don't even know exist. You're commuting through bedrock while someone directly above you is having coffee, completely unaware there's a highway under their feet.